If you can get that mental game down, you are going to be winning in this transition of our society into different economy, different foods, different locations, different business, different services. Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne. Look at what's happening right now with the Arctic ice increases. It is anomalous and I'm really curious next week when this Arctic air vortex recombines in on itself and it turns into an actual freezing Arctic vortex right over the North Pole again next week. They're going to try to, they're going to try to make you not even notice that. They're not going to talk about it in the news. They're just going to try to make it disappear because you've been told everything's melting. It's the lowest ice ever. Well, wait a second. What about the thickness? They never talk about the Arctic ice thickness. They only talk about the actual coverage, which is only like 1.5 million square kilometers less anyway. It's not like 10 million less square kilometers. It's 1.5 million square kilometers at most. But in the 1930s, there was even less ice than there is today. So they don't like to talk about the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s. When you look at the NOAA temperature data manipulation, all these stories are coming out. James Dellingpole just did a good article talking about the NOAA fraud. And I laugh because they go, it makes Enron accounting look good compared to what's just coming out with NOAA. They have manipulated temperatures up to 2 degrees Celsius in places. So NOAA caught manipulating temperatures. So what you really need to do is take a look at the 1930s. And go over to Tony Heller's site. He has a lot of newspaper clippings, and he follows the 1930s Dust Bowl era with a lot of the news clippings on microfilm that talk about the exact same thing. Hey, there's record low ice, there's low ice. This is all, you could have a playbook, and I could give you the news clipping. And if I didn't tell you what year it was from, you'd think it's from this year, but actually it would be from the 1930s. I also pointed out in yesterday's video, this snows that had occurred in the Sahara Desert back in January of 2018 were considered rare. It snowed 3 feet in the deserts. And they had those beautiful pictures of the sand dunes in the Sahara Desert covered in snow. And the snow went all the way down coastal as well, and it was considered incredibly rare. This is in January. Incredibly rare. NASA said it was rare. European Space Agency said it was rare. Guardian calling it rare. All the news agencies actually came clean because it was such a huge story that they had to. Everybody's picking it up and it's through social media, so they couldn't just hide it. And if you thought changes like these were limited to today's world, the fate of Rome, climate, disease, and the end of an empire. This book is a sweeping new history of how climate change and disease helped bring down the Roman Empire. An interweaving grand historical narrative with climate science. The fate of Rome was decided not by emperors, soldiers, and barbarians, but also volcanic eruptions, solar cycles, climate instability, and devastating viruses. 3 feet of snow in the Saharan desert with those stunningly beautiful pictures. Everything from the mosques to the clay walls, and you got the dunes and the just classic-looking villages, all covered in snow, and the dunes with that kind of orange sticking out of the white. It's undeniable. At that point, you have to cover the story. So they were forced to cover it. But they all labeled it across the board as extremely rare snowfall. The depth, yes, 3 feet. But when it went coastal, it decreased down there to several inches. That's still incredibly rare. In January, so what do you call this when roads are closed in Algeria due to too much snowfall in the same areas? It just shouldn't be happening unless you look back in history and you find the reconstruction map from the Maunder Minimum, and you'll start to see those areas actually got cooler during the Maunder Minimum in the 1600s. Look around, temperature maps say 1640, something around the era, 1640 to 1670. Take a look at the temperature drops in those exact same areas of North Africa, and you go, oh, that matches up perfectly. So we're really starting to see these repeats in weather. So, again, I'll go back to Christian at Ice Age Farmer. He has a wiki page up where he has started open source to put together crop losses globally. But he has a crop loss wiki map up there. So if you come across a crop loss event that is detailed, that has statistical numbers and can be verified with local news reports, you can put it in the map. And he is trying to, along with myself, I really am interested to see where these losses are happening. Because once you see the pattern of where these losses are happening, it'll be discernible on a map. And then all you have to do is overlay the maps of the temperature variance in the mini ice age. So those will be the 3 point of reference. So once you see it, and once you start to see that there's more amplification in these areas where they're getting, multiple feet of hail, huge, incredible floods, you'll know that that's an area just weather-wise alone that's changing, and then it will continue to, have these anomalous extreme weather events. So that'll be a place on the planet that'll keep having this type of increase in activity. But then if there's crop losses there, and then if you can match that with the temperature reconstruction map of prior times, if you dig deeper, that one generic map with the temperature reconstruction for the Maunder Minimum, that's one thing. But you can get really regional, and you can even find, specifics like Portugal during the Grand Solar Minimum. So when you find, vineyard losses in Portugal, and then you can find the exact spots where they did the, lake core drilling sediments, and they matched up the pollen count with. There's more pollen when it's warmer. There's less pollen when it's colder, right? There's more plants that are blooming when it's warmer, so they do that. They count the pollen inside the grains of sediment. But then they can really pinpoint it as to which areas cooled and which temperature areas in which countries. So if you get down in a little greater detail, you can really start to put it all together as a clear picture. This is why stock traders, options traders, and futures traders are now so incredibly interested in this info. They're looking for people who can put these dots together to give them the edge on trading. And it should give you the edge on where you're looking to do something. If you have an agricultural project going out, you really need to do some due diligence to find out in that area, was there a super huge effect in the last Grand Solar Minimum? And then multiply that, I'm going to say, by 2. I'm going to say double the effects of the Grand Solar Minimum of the Maunder Minimum, because we're going to have a much heavier overriding cycle, more powerful cycle on top of that. If you're going to buy land or you're going to start planting something, you better find out where the 3,000-year flood mark was, or the 5,000-year high mark for the flood was. Not the insurance regulations that are looking for the 500 or 1,000-year flood. They won't insure your home unless it's above the 500-year flood mark. The 1,000-year flood mark someplace. Every insurance carrier is a little different. But they have a benchmark of how far you need to build above the century flood, multi-century flood high water level. You need to do some DD on that and make sure that you absolutely are building above the 5,000-year flood mark. And I'm not kidding either. These once in 1,000-year floods are going to become absolutely common. And then when we get would be considered a mega flood, this will be the once in a 5,000-year flood. And truly, these will be like historic events that are absolutely turning places into inland seas, like we saw over in China last year, that decimated their corn crop. You could see how the Yellow River Basin all backed up, and it turned basically anything that was along the Yellow River into an inland lake. And you could see where expressways underwater, cities underwater. It was the most massive floods they'd had in 200 years in China. And they have incredible irrigation right now. Incredible engineering, dams, aquifers, or aqueducts, my mistake. They have engineered that place to drain the water out because they've been plagued with floods for thousands of years there. And they were so inundated and overwhelmed that it flooded that much. There's a lot of pictures. You should take a look at them. Go to from last year. That was a massive flood, but imagine something that's 10 times more intense coming than that. So if you're going to do any kind of ag project, you need to see where your high water marks are, and you need to go back in history and see what kind of extreme events have been recorded. A lot of people left historical documentation. They wrote journals. Find out where these events have taken place in your own local area. I have people write me all the time asking me, hey, where can I move to? Where can I relocate? I don't have an answer for you. You need to do your own research because I didn't investigate every single place on the planet where you could go. You know, what happened there in the 1600s? Volcanic eruptions, bad place to be. Cascadia Range, I'm going to call it right now, on the record. Cascadia Range will have 4 volcanoes go off, possibly all 4 erupting at the same time. But they're going to start ticking off because every time there's a grand solar minimum, Cascadia Range is one of the most sensitive ranges that goes off first. Let's go back to the magnetosphere, coupling on that. When these jet streams start wandering and you get all these ferocious electrical storms and combining fronts and cold in the springtime and cold in the summer and warm in the winter, and you're going to get mix-ups. It's going to be strange. A lot of fireballs are coming through. Those little grains of sand that would normally get burned up way up in the atmosphere or glanced off that wouldn't even make it in here are now making it incredibly low into our atmosphere. Incredibly low down. You're seeing all these types of fireballs coming, even mid-air explosions with the shock waves everywhere now. This is because of our weakening magnetic field. As well, the galactic cosmic rays that are coming in are exciting the magma chambers and silica-rich magma formations and chambers under the Earth. There's been a couple new papers come out this last year talking about cosmic rays exciting magma chambers with, it's got to be silica-rich, though. That's the difference. Silica-rich. And those are the explosive volcanoes that we're used to seeing. Places like Japan, Sakurajima would be a perfect example of that. These cosmic rays are coming from 2 sources. They're coming from the sun, and they're coming from the galactic web out there, supernova that have exploded before, things coming from our own galaxy. So we're getting bombarded with galactic cosmic rays. And I want to go into geoengineering for a moment. Stratospheric, aerosol, geoengineering. The airplanes, they leave these trails in the sky that just stay up for hours and hours and hours, and they dissipate and create these kind of what look like cirrus clouds, something super high in the sky. Those are not regular condensation trails coming out of airplanes. Some people would say it's there and it's a military program, it's to change the weather, etc. But my firm belief is it's cosmic radiation management. Because the amount of galactic cosmic rays coming down, it's going to increase from this point forward. It's actually beaten the forecasts that were put out, let's say 2-3 years ago when we were coming into the solar minimum. They put out a lot of different forecasts talking about the amount of galactic cosmic rays that would increase and the percentage increase that they had forecast coming out. We've already blown past that. We've eclipsed their maximum prediction for galactic cosmic ray increases right now. So as we move forward with more galactic cosmic rays come in, you're going to get more cloud cover. And I encourage you to watch Svensmark, the Cloud Mystery from Svensmark, Heinrich Svensmark, Svensmark. They built these cloud chambers after their funding was removed because they had alternate theory to what causes clouds, and it wasn't CO2. So they had all their funding removed, and they were off on their own, building their own equipment. And this guy's story is absolutely a textbook case of what happens when you didn't agree with the CO2 theory back in the early 2000s. They ruined his career. They tried to destroy him. They tried to take away his tenure. They tried to get him not hired. Anywhere he went to go look for a university position, he was denied for a while because he was on their blacklist. So they had to privately fund their research. And this is what the findings were. Galactic cosmic rays have the initial charge enough to start the process of cloud nucleation. And then CERN backed up, but didn't come as far on the projections as saying the amount of cloud cover that it can induce. They just said in CERN that yes, the possibility for this electrical particle to come down and at least create a base, if you will, for something else to build off of. That electro charge will draw something else to it. And then from there, something else will draw, and then it will get a dust particle formed, and then we'll get a water droplet around that. That's a simple explanation. Everything's there for you clearly to take a look at how this mechanism works and how the cloud cover is increasing. So this would explain these incredible floods. It's not heating oceans, because CO2 doesn't go down 800 feet into the ocean. 2,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, CO2 gas does not go down there and heat oceans, as the IPCC would have you believe. You got to use some common sense. I mean, they're telling you a trace gas that's 3/100ths of 1%. And for those of you who don't know, CO2 is not even 1% of our atmosphere. It is 3/100ths of 1%. And they're telling you that that penetrated 2,000 feet under the sea in the depth of the water column and now is responsible for the heating oceans. You have got to be kidding me. Even a kindergartner would wake up and go, are you kidding me? How does the gas go 2,000 feet under the sea? In the water column, 2,000 feet deep. It doesn't. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds. So to explain all these clouds, they're coming up and saying, oh, all the oceans are heating, they're all... But when you look statistically, the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation is decreasing in its 60-year, it's going into its cool phase. So that is part of the Atlantic Ocean right there cooling. Indian dipole, that's flipping all over the place anyway every 2 years, so it could be hot or cold, but it's currently cool. Southern Oscillation Index, that's below Australia down there in the Antarctic region. Cool. So they're trying to blame all this increasing cloud cover on other factors than galactic cosmic rays. So those cosmic rays, they're exciting our magma chambers and are responsible for increased volcanism. And also they're responsible for increasing cloud cover. See, I'm trying to impart to you that this whole cycle runs until 2035. And the most, heavy crop losses that we will endure will be 2024, 2023. We're a long way from there, and we're already starting to see stuff that wasn't predicted to happen until like 2021, but it's happening now. So obviously there's a more heavy cycle on top of this that's overriding. Because there's a lot of good written record talking about the intensity ramp up that they experienced in the 1600s. There's an enormous amount of text around from the 1600s still, and they talked about the changes year upon year. And if you study those, you can get a timeline and go, oh, well, all right, it took about 12 years for everything to really ramp up before they saw a lot of crop losses. So where does that leave us as a planet? Predicting that we still had until 2021 or 2022 before, the world would wake up and understand that these crop losses are here for several years, and we need to get some type of agricultural reconstruction or revamp going on globally to keep 8 billion people fed. This timeline has drastically been compressed. You need to be aware of the weather changes that are coming and what's happening around you so you can see it. So when you talk to people, it's more explainable than just weather's changing, man, CO2. It's not that at all. It's too fast. It's eclipsing anything in the wildest except for the temperature changes that the IPCC was talking about. It's happening so much faster. So their whole CO2 model is, 3 decades behind. None of these temperature increases have taken place. Now, they were talking about 1 to 2 C warming globally. It hasn't happened. The sea levels haven't risen. We were told we'd have to move our cities because all the sea level rise. That ain't happening. That's the mechanism behind the changes. The sun, electromagnetically, affects our Earth. And when that happens, our jet streams go out of flow. More cosmic rays come in. They create more cloud cover. They also, at the same time, excite silica-rich magma chambers, which create more volcanic eruptions. More volcanic eruptions have more aerosol in the air, which also is another cloud-inducing particle up there. And you have the sulfur dioxide. Then we have these massive dust storms. This is a perfect example. The dust storms are going to create nuclei for cloud and snow or whatever else forms over there in these weather fronts. It's just unknown at the moment how this is going to behave. Same thing. A year without a summer and Tambora eruption, that particulate blocked out enough sun to drop temperatures globally for 2 years and wipe out crop production across the planet during that time. You just go early 1800s, Tambora, year without a summer. I don't know how many people are even aware of this event. How frequently is it taught in our schooling system? So this is the whole mechanism behind everything. I hope you got a better understanding of it, because these are the true drivers of the climate and what's changing. There's nowhere to run. You're not going to hide from this. You're going to need to work together with your communities moving forward. You can find everything I'm talking about through so many persons' research. I've created my own website, oilseedcrops.org. That's oilseedcrops.org. You can find a full range of information in the link that says Grand Solar Minimum Links and Information Resources. I listed at least 100 references and resources for you to go and actually do your own research. Start with John Casey. What the effects of the sun have on our own magnetosphere on Earth and all these changes that you can expect moving forward with the intensification of the weather. As we move forward, our economy is going to have a little bit more difficult time functioning than it does now, especially when there's crop losses and banks are not functioning, as they should be because of economic contraction. Perhaps some civil disturbances as food gets more expensive and people can't afford food, and just there's a whole gamut of other things society-wise that have happened in these repeating cycles. You can expect three things for sure in the Grand Solar Minimum. Economic declines, population migration, and food scarcity. Now, these are things that all have a real big effect on society. So as we move forward, there's going to have to be a solution for every single one of these. Moving our agriculture system indoor could be a mitigation measure for part of the agriculture. We could move some food zones. We could bring some new zones online, but it's not going to be the exact same crop. You're going to have to go ahead and be able to adapt and morph your food consumption. You're not going to have exactly what you have today. It'll change, and if you can deal with that, awesome. That's a mitigation measure. Consuming different foods, using different grow zones. We can do something about it. We can move it indoor. Okay, that's easy. Well, maybe not easy, but that's at least a start. That's pretty easy to think about. Second one would be population migration. Beyond what's going on with the influx of migrants across the planet into different continents, that's one thing. That's political, pretty much. What I'm talking about is when places become uninhabitable and property values fall and people realize their electrical grids go down every single winter and they can't cope and they just can't heat their homes in the winter anymore, whatever. They're going to have to move. Population migration is another huge, huge fingerprint of the Grand Solar Minimums. I don't care if it was way back 79 AD. Look at the population migration and movement where they had further extended northward during the warmer times, and then when it got cooler, look how everything compressed and everybody moved into Southern Europe at that point. There was huge migrations of population. And then the economy took a hit as well because of property values are falling and just a lot of other types of, say, traditional jobs or, things that we use for cities, services, etc. If they disappear, well, that's going to have an effect on the economy for sure. But let's talk about the economy, because if we have mitigation measures to do something and we know how we can maybe morph agriculture to meet our needs, they're already thinking about the solutions for our economy as well. So this is the second solution, but these are intertwined like DNA strands going up as an indicator as to how intense this thing is coming along. Cryptocurrency is going to be the new money for our planet. You can use it anywhere. It's transmittable anywhere. You won't need a third-party intermediary, and it'll still have value wherever you go on the planet, and you can trade amongst each other to keep buy, sell, trade moving. And this is going to involve smart contracts, which will be taxable in the future. You can't land a ship of 60,000 tons of wheat into a port without a government knowing it. It's not like you can hide it on the blockchain, please. There's going to be taxable events that move forward, but the payment systems to assure that you as a supplier and I as a buyer and everybody gets what they are intended to get, not using fiat currency, will need a different system. And this is it. Crypto is going to be it with smart contracts for food deliveries. And as I've said before, they're probably going to issue tokens for grain belts or individual harvests for individual years. So let's say Kansas has its own wheat harvest, and they will issue their own tokens for the Kansas wheat harvest 2021. And you'll have to pre-buy that. And the token value raise offering will be based on what they consider they'll be getting out of the fields for bushel harvests. How many tons are coming out, basically. And they'll divide that, and then they'll put a token offering out. So you, as a manufacturer, could buy up that. You, as an individual, will be able to also get in and buy however many kilograms or whatever you want to buy as well. But I see every individual harvest now coming into a token. And after the harvest is over and everything's been distributed, I think all those tokens will be burned. But over the time, I think there'll be millions and millions and millions of utility tokens issued for each individual harvest. And this is great because globally we'll be able to still buy, sell, trade. I don't care which country you're in, you're still going to take Ethereum. You're still going to take Ripple. And all the banks are moving to DLT, which is distributed ledger technology, or DLT. Anyway, for quicker settlement, fine. Because you have to realize, first and foremost, energy is number 2 on our needs of a planetary civilization. Food is number 1. Well, water too, but let's just keep it with, grains and oil, for example. If people don't eat, they don't need your energy because they are not there. They died. So as we move forward, the number 1 most important commodity on our planet is going to be food, crops, specifically grains. And the grains that are staples today are definitely going to shift. So look at some of the second tier, the hard grains, something like buckwheat, millet, sorghum. These are going to take huge steps forward in usage and also consumption. We use a lot of that stuff for animal food now. Oats, you might have it for breakfast, but it's going to become a staple as our grain shifts. The grain belts are going to shift. Our needs are going to shift. The consumption will shift. Everything's going to shift. You just have to understand there's going to be a lot of movement of things that you thought were stable before in our society. Stability, that is a thing of the past. Al Gore said snow is a thing of the past. Your children will never know what snow is. Snow is a thing of the past. That was incorrect. But what is correct is change is constant. If you can wrap your head around that point alone, and you know that every month, every year, you're going to have to adapt and change and morph and move, that's the mental game right there. If you can get that mental game down, you are going to be winning in this transition of our society into different economy, different foods, different locations, different business, different services. It's all changing. And also, we were talking last night, I had a meeting with a couple traders. These guys are options traders, and we were talking about Grand Solar Minimum. The point that the harvests come at certain times of the season, and also when you have a lot of money and you feel wealthy, even if things are more expensive, they don't seem more expensive because you have that feeling of wealth, that abundant feeling of, like we had in the 1990s. Everybody was rolling it. Stocks were going up. Everything was going up. You bought anything, it went up in price. Everybody was rolling in that feeling of wealth and abundance because it was across the society. Mental game again. It is a mental game. When you're feeling wealthy, if things cost more money, it doesn't matter because you have that mental feeling of wealthy. That mental thinking, that mental feeling, you're not in that lack and scarcity, or you're not terrified because food pricing. On the inverse, look at when the food prices start to rise and when the inverse of the planting, or when there's not an abundance of the harvest coming in, specifically wheat in the Northern Hemisphere. And the new FAO report coming out talking about a 3% decrease globally for wheat. This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.